In this unit, we're going to learn about two of the empires that we talked about in the very first unit of the year, the Mughal Empire and then the Ottoman Empire. So let's do the Mughal Empire first. The Mughal Empire, as you can see, hopefully you know what this is on the map, and there's my grandfather clock right on time. Sorry, I thought it already rang, but we're going to keep on going. Alright, so the Mughal Empire existed mostly in northern India, but expanded to the extent that you see before you right now at its largest peak. Let's look at how this great empire came to be. Muslim armies, as you can see, began trying to invade India during the 8th century, and at that point most of India was Hindu. The bloody wars went on for nearly 300 years, and it was the Hindu armies succeeding pretty decently in holding off the much larger Muslim armies. But by the year 1000, so we're talking about 300 years later, the Hindu armies had grown really weak and tired, and the Muslim armies, calling themselves Mughals, fully invaded most of India because they kept getting more and more and more reinforcements. This is the time period when more and more people are turning to Islam, and those males that joined the faith of Islam were going into the Muslim army. So it was almost like they had an unlimited supply of men to fulfill the military obligation, and the Mughals were just getting killed. So the numerous Mughal armies set up many small separate territories that were loosely united under a sultan located in the city of Delhi. And for nearly 400 years, a total of 33 sultans ruled over these Hindu territories with an iron fist. Remember, the Hindus do not want them there. So they're going to fight constantly as much as they can. Sometimes they do it in secret. Sometimes they just bold-faced said, I'm not going to do what you tell me to do. You're a Mughal. I don't respect you. I'm not Muslim. You are. That kind of stuff. So near 400 years, 33 sultans will rule the Hindu territory. That doesn't sound like a lot because we're talking about 400 years, but it is a lot. And one of the reasons that it was a lot is a lot of those sultans were murdered by the people who did not want them there, the Hindus. So it was a very fragile relationship from the very, very beginning of this. The Mughal Empire under Akbar, though, was going to be a totally different story. So there's centuries of turmoil between the Muslim Mughals, remember the Mughals are Muslim, and the Indian Hindus. And the Mughal Empire started to finally show some real success under this guy by the name of Akbar. And you can see here that he ruled for quite a while, 1556 to 1605. That's a pretty long rule. And he did things differently than anybody ever had before, and this made their home successful. One of the things that he did focused on religion. He knew that there was this hatred between the Muslims and the Hindus, and he felt in order for the Mughal Empire to really succeed, he had to get rid of that. And that's a pretty hard task. So Akbar, he was a Muslim, but he promoted religious freedom and tolerance to all people. And to show his tolerance, his wives consisted of Muslims, Hindus, and Christians. And all these wives were permitted to practice their own religions in his home or in public, wherever they chose to. He actually liked it when they did it in public because it made his people realize that he meant it. So for a Muslim man to marry a Hindu or a Christian woman was a really big deal. It didn't hurt that Akbar really, really liked women. We'll talk more about that in a minute. But then he decided he had to do something with the government too. And he allowed both Muslims and Hindus to rise to power in his government. That was a really big deal. And he created a fair tax program, kind of like we have today. So previously, Muslims and Hindus were not created equal when it came to taxes. Of course, the Hindus were taxed much higher, but now he's saying we're not going to do that. So not only are you allowing Hindus to take government positions, but you're also taxing them fairly. You can see why his empire finally started showing some successes. The last thing he really thought he had to deal with was the military. He kept his military strong in numbers and firepower. They were well trained in the use of cannons. That was the new toy of the day. And as he captured new territories, he made the leaders that he captured officers in his own army. Basically, he bribed them. Pretty much gave them anything that they wanted in order for them to turn to his side and rule honestly in his military at an even higher place than they would have been in their own military. And at one point, his kingdom was over 100 million military men strong. That's a pretty big military. Akbar went even farther, though. He thought that he needed to make everything different and new and wonderful in his empire. So he started to focus on something that no leader had: culture and literature. So in culture, Akbar welcomed all languages into his court, including Persian, Hindi, Arabic. The list goes on and on. European languages as well, so it would be Spanish, French. He actually invited so many people from so many different countries and paid them very well to stay and teach his own people all these new languages, that whole new languages emerged from this. And some of these people left India eventually and carried those languages out into Europe and Russia and other areas. So Akbar is responsible for some of the languages that we have in the world now. He also welcomed new ideas in the fields of arts. Book illustrations became very popular during his reign. This might be because there was something wrong with Akbar, and of course, so much time has passed, we're never going to really know what it was. But he absolutely thought education and learning, book learning, was really, really important. He built all kinds of schools, but he himself never learned to read. So we're not really sure what it was that was wrong with him. Perhaps he had dyslexia. Some of the diary entries that his scribe put down for him seemed to kind of indicate that he had problems with reading. That may be why he had so many book illustrations done. Maybe he really needed a picture book because he just could not learn to read. He tried and tried and tried, and it just never clicked for him. So again, dyslexia kind of seems to maybe be the answer of the day. He also encouraged the use of Western ideas in art, and many Mughal portraits contained haloed heads, like those of the Western saints. And if you look at the tapestries here at the bottom of the screen, the one on the far right is supposed to actually be the Ark, Noah's Ark. But if you look really closely, there's a lot of men in there wearing turbans on their heads. So you can see that it is from India. You can see the dresses of the clothing of the people indicates it's from India. But there's a lot of Western influence in it as well. Actually in all three, if you look at them really closely. Again, Akbar really was unique. He had lots and lots of libraries built. He encouraged writings from all cultures to be included in that library in all different languages. And the portraits that he had put up in the library were from all different parts of Western Europe. He just really felt that it was important that people come out of childhood a well-rounded adult and know the things that maybe could help them change the world and make it a better place. Now, Akbar also invented the game Parcheesi. This is what it looks like if you've never seen it before. The unique thing about Akbar is, I told you that he loved women. He actually had a game, a giant game, very much like this one, made in his castle. And he used women as the players, as the pieces on the game board. And it always had to be the most beautiful women in the kingdom, and it was this, big giant betting match. It's pretty serious stuff, but I just thought it was kind of cool that he used the pawns in it were actually real human women. So let's talk about what happened after Akbar passes away. Akbar, we talked about how he loved to build things, make his empire very unique and beautiful. And he built lots and lots of large buildings with really intricate art decorating the structures. But his grandson, Shah Jahan, is going to build something much beyond the dreams of Akbar, and that was the Taj Mahal. 20,000 workers took 22 years of labor and turned the Taj Mahal into one of the 7 wonders of the world. And if you will click again, you will be able to see a picture of the beautiful Taj Mahal. It's easy to recognize because of the reflecting pool in front of it. That's one of the key features of it. But as Shah Jahan was building this tribute to his beloved wife, who was dying when it was first built, of course, she was long dead by the time that it was done, but he was doing it out of love for her, and he ignored the political and financial needs of his empire. Once his wife passed away, especially, and she is actually buried inside the Taj Mahal, and he's buried beside of her. They put them in the floor, so you don't walk over them. Well, I guess you could. I'm not really sure. Maybe you do walk over them, but they're actually buried in the floor side by side. And during his reign, because he was so obsessed with this wife, and even beyond her death, he became more obsessed with her, getting the Taj Mahal done. He wanted to make sure it was done before he passed away, and it would be the most beautiful building in the world for the most beautiful woman in the world. So he reigned from 1628 to 1658, so 30 years, and 20 of it was spent building the Taj Mahal. And basically, he did nothing else the entire time that he was in charge. He just kind of let everything fall apart. So the Mughal Empire went down this very steep decline, and several elderly or ineffective rulers, I guess you could say, took the throne after him. And they needed money. Every time there was a new ruler, it just seemed like the empire was in worse and worse shape. So many of these rulers began handing over trading posts to foreign powers. They were giving them money, these foreign powers were, to lease ports. And if you will click to the next slide, you'll see the ports that I'm talking about. So you can see here all the different people by looking at the map who actually leased ports. So you have the Portuguese, the British, the French, the Dutch, the Danish. We're not around yet, so it wasn't us. But the British, if you look at the flags, the British actually had a lot of ports, and they got the best ones for themselves. But it was a way for the Mughal leaders to get money. What was really happening, though, and they were totally blind to this, they were actually opening the door to invasion. And bad, bad, bad things were going to happen because of that. Portugal, England, and the Netherlands were the three big ones that opened coastal trading ports in India. And before they knew it, they were going to be imperialized or taken over by these foreign powers. So let's talk about what happens when this takeover does happen. Britain is going to be the one to do it. Like I said, originally they got the best land for themselves. They were the most powerful country in the world at the time. And by the middle of the 1700s, the Mughals have been so weakened that the major British trading company, which went by the name of the British East India Company, took the risk of sending in troops to take total control over much of India. And it worked. This East India Company is not a nice entity. They are the same ones that are responsible for the Boston Tea Party. It was their tea that the settlers here in America, the colonists, dumped into the harbor. So not a nice company, been doing bad things all around the world for a very long time by this time period and beyond. But the British East India Company was led by British officers, of course, but it was staffed in India, get this, in India, by Indian soldiers called sepoys. This was a really fragile relationship between the officers and the sepoys. And the sepoys were actually both Muslim and Hindu people that were forced to be together and act as British officers or British soldiers. So you've got the Hindus and the Muslims who still don't like each other. No matter what Akbar did, that religion thing, religion is just never going to go away. And the differences in it, they just could not see eye to eye. Their religions were so very different. And because of that, the sepoys still hated each other, but they also hate the British who's ruling them. Not a good relationship all around. And I do want to throw in there that Hindu is actually not a real one religion. Hindu was a name given to every religion that they could not recognize when the British arrived there. So the British actually named the religion of Hinduism. And again, it's not one belief. You could go talk to 500 different Hindus all over India even today, and they could not tell you, they wouldn't tell you the same thing about their religion or how they worship or when they worship or anything else. It just simply was an easier way for the British to identify them instead of saying not a Muslim, not a Christian, not a Jew. We don't know what they are. They just call them all Hindus. So that's the kind of control that the British took over India almost immediately. Actually named the religion for these people. That's not the only disadvantages of British control. The British control most of the political and economic power in India almost from day one. And there's three main things that I want you to know that they did that changed the face of India and changed the lives of both the Hindus and the Muslims. Indian-owned businesses were very seldom allowed anymore. If you were an Indian, Hindu, or Muslim, and you owned a business, it was taken from you. You may be allowed to still work there as an employee, but it was now going to be under the ownership of the British military, and any income was given to the British military so that they could make money off of it. Cash crop production. Cash crop means anything that you could grow to make money off of. Things like indigo, that the dye to make blue, make the color blue. Anything you can think of that is not edible kind of became the thing of the day in India. So these cash crops that made lots of money for them all over the world, but the production of them led to an insufficient food supply and famine among India's people. The British people were still getting fed from their home country, but they weren't bringing any food in for the Indians, and they had forbidden them from growing crops that you could eat. They wanted cash crops. So you literally had people starving to death. And the third major disadvantage was that missionaries damaged the belief system of the Indian traditions. Not only did they just, categorize all these unknown religions to them into Hinduism, but they actually went in and tried to convert them to Christianity and made it a law that you couldn't do certain things that these people have been doing for a very long time, and it just messed up their whole belief system. Now, we can't talk completely about bad things that happened without saying some of the good things. I mean, taking over another country is seldom has a great outcome, but there are a few things that British control actually did do for India, and it still has an effect on them today. So let's do a list of those. Britain laid the world's third largest railroad network in India. And if you're looking at the screen right now, you can see all the black lines are railroads. Now, India was not rich by any means, and when the railroad became a really big thing in other modernizing countries like America, India was not in any position to build her own railroads. So they actually got a railroad all across their country for free. The British laid it for them. Now, the British aren't doing this to be kind to them. The British needed to trade within India themselves. So they built the railroads to keep their trade going and to keep their military moving across this giant landmass. So they're not doing it for the Indians. But when they finally are kicked out of India in 1947, the railroad is still there, and it was done free of charge. Same thing for roads. They developed a modern road system. And again, it wasn't to be kind to the Indians, it was to help themselves out. But in the end, India benefited from it. Telephone and telegraph lines, same thing, installed all the way across the country free of charge so that the British could keep doing their trade. Dams, bridges, irrigation canals, all installed to stop flooding in certain areas so that they could buy the grow the cash crops better. So again, that's dams, bridges, irrigation canals. They also had to worry about sanitation and public health. So sanitation and public health was improved by the British simply because they didn't want their own people getting sick. So again, it's not out of the kindness of their heart, but it still got done. Schools were founded and literacy rates excelled. The schools were not originally done for the British children, or I'm sorry, for the Indian children, but as British children started coming with their father, and the mother was coming, and they had their whole family coming, more and more schools opened up, and over time they allowed Indian children to start coming. Only certain children at first. At first, of course, it's only going to be boys, and they would only go to the 6th grade, but the schools were there, and they were still standing when the British left. So it was something that's going to help India for a very long time. So the British succeeded in removing bandits that were causing warfare among rulers. That's a really big thing. The British actually ran off marauding bandits that had been pretty much coming into India for hundreds of years and just randomly killing people and starting these kind of tiny wars all over India. But the British did get rid of them. So all of these are actual advantages of British control, even if they didn't mean to do that. So eventually the sepoys, of course, are going to rebel. I mean, they had to see it coming. You put Hindus and Muslims together and you try and control them with a force that both of them hate. That's not going to work out so well. So, but why? Why, if Britain really did give them the railroads and the roads and the telephone lines and the sewer systems and all this great stuff, what would finally set them off to the point that they would actually rebel? Poverty and hunger was blamed on the British. More and more disgruntled, the sepoy began to feel that the British were actually out to destroy everything about India. There was just something needed to put everybody over that line to say, we're not going to take this anymore. And it actually was a rumor. It was a false rumor. And the rumor was that they had these bullet cartridges. As sepoys, they had to have bullets. And the bullet cartridges that they carried in their belts, you can see the little kind of purse-looking things on their waist here. That's to keep your bullets in. And the bullets can't just be banging around against each other as the soldiers are marching or running or doing whatever they're doing. So they actually were encased in fat. And in order to open up a new bullet casing, you were out in the field, you ripped it open with your teeth. And it was actually chicken fat that held the bullets kind of in place and separate from one another. It acted as cushioning. But this rumor came to be that the fat was either beef or pork, which is very against Hindu and Muslim religion. And they just felt like this was the last straw. Now, it was a rumor. The British were very, very careful to make sure that it was only chicken fat. They understood that that was going to be a really big deal. But rumor or not, it's going to start a huge rebellion that's going to go on for 2 years. So again, the Sepoy Rebellion, it goes on for 2 years, and it spread over much of India. But in the end, the Muslim and Hindus just could not get their people to unite long enough to actually overthrow the British. There's still too much hatred between the two religious groups to just pull themselves together. So in the end, the Sepoys, they lose. And as a punishment, and to make sure it never happens again, the British divided India into 11 provinces and a total of 250 districts. Each one was ruled by a military sect and a British governor. So most of India was under complete British control, and it was tight control. They had a curfew. No Indian stepped out of line no matter what. Very few of them were ever given a second chance if they did something wrong. All of this led to further hatred towards the British and an increased amount of racism towards both the Muslims and the Hindus of India. So the British are treating them even worse. The Muslims hate the Hindus more, the Hindus hate the Muslims more, and they all hate the British more. Just a very, very unsettled place for anybody to be at the time. All right, let's look at some of the contributions of the Mughal Empire. We'll just do a real quick summary. Of course, you have the spread of Islam all over India. And you've got new innovations in art and architecture, like the Taj Mahal. That was a really big deal. The arrival of European trading posts in a location convenient to trade with all of Asia. India was kind of the stopping point. Influenced British textiles with Indian style, and you can see the textiles here that I'm talking about. They also grew indigo in India. It grows very, very easy in India, so it became a huge crop there. Southern India had some items very, very specific to Southern India, and all of them were worth lots of money. But I bet you can't guess which thing on here, between the silk, the spices, and the gems, is worth the most money in this time period. Believe it or not, it's the spices. People would kill for spices in the 16 and 1700s. Basically, the only spice that was out there was salt. There wasn't even pepper yet. Salt and dandelions. That was pretty much all that the Westerners had to flavor their food at all. So spices were very, very valuable, and lots of ships coming out of India were captured by pirates just for spices. There was no gold in the chest there; it was all spices. That's what everybody wanted. So that's kind of the Mughal Empire in a nutshell. I know we went through it really, really fast, but let's do the Ottoman Empire now. All right, if you will watch this little play here, you can see how quickly the Ottoman Empire grew. Keep watching. It just keeps getting bigger. Keep in mind that as it's spreading, Islam is spreading with it. So you can see for a while they actually took over Greece, all of Turkey, of course, Egypt. There you go, 1881. It's finally starting to fade. Getting close to World War I. The end of the war, there you go, it's over. And what's left of it became modern-day Turkey. All right, so the Ottoman Empire is going to last a really, really long time. It's kind of easy to tell that because the map is so huge. It lasted, as you can see on the slide here, from 1299 to 1922. And in the beginning, the focus of it was in Asia Minor, or what we now call Turkey. And the Ottoman Empire once included parts of 3 different continents. So that's a really big deal. I want you to know that. They were once in Asia, Europe, and Africa, all at the same time. So it's pretty significant. Make sure you know that. Know the 3 continents. All right, so in 1453, the Ottomans will seize Constantinople, and it will be renamed it's going to be renamed Istanbul. You remember this siege if you had World I, because it used to be named after Constantine. So Constantinople was the seat of the Byzantine Empire at one time until it was ransacked by Christians in the Fourth Crusade. And the Ottomans moved in not too long after that, realized how weak the city was, took it over pretty easily, and renamed it Istanbul. And that is where we find one of the most beautiful buildings in the entire Ottoman Empire, the Hagia Sophia. All right, so let's talk about the Muslim Turks. It's a whole different story than the Mughals are. The Muslim Turks, Muslims out of Turkey, were religiously tolerant. Muslims and non-Muslims, so anybody not a Muslim, were allowed to coexist in peace. And they actually had quite a few Jews and Christians, Muslim Turks and Muslim non-Turks all living together. Very few problems. One of the reasons was that they had a really good administration and a very solid government. They didn't rule with an iron fist. Much of what they came up with just simply made sense, and people didn't have anything to complain about. And one of the things that this government came up with was trade-offs for services and debts. And the trade-off was that Muslims were not required to serve in the Turkish army, but they did not have to pay taxes. Now, on the reverse side of that, non-Muslims did not have to serve in the military, but they did have to pay taxes. So Muslims were military, no taxes. Non-Muslims, not military, and they have to pay the tax. Sounds like a pretty fair trade-off. Let's talk about one of the kind of goofiest things that came out of the Ottoman Empire. Around the middle of the 1500s, the very first coffee house arrived in the Ottoman Empire. And it became a place for males. Women weren't supposed to go there. A place for males to gather and socialize. You know the men always get the good stuff. Coffee houses were a favorite of many, but religious and governmental leaders had some real problems with the idea. Suddenly they started getting a little bit afraid of these coffee houses. Some of the things they had against them, or the things that they tried to tell society to convince society that the coffee house was evil, was they said coffee is an intoxicating drug and it's bad for you physically. Well, it is bad for you physically, but it's not intoxicating unless you drink too much and you get the shakes. I guess you might be able to call that intoxicating. So that didn't work out too well for him. That excuse, a drug, didn't work out too well. So then they said that the coffee house coffee house conversation might turn political and lead to the endangerment of the Sultan. So if lots of men gather in one place at one time, they might start talking about very bad things. That excuse didn't go over too well either. So the churches and some of the government leaders finally said, I think they were trying to get the women upset here. People who gather at coffee houses tend to be from the lower end of society. And the list of people that they said hang out there, not true, but they said it's gamblers, drug abusers, anybody who wants to be immoral, prostitutes drop in now and then. None of that was true. But I really think that they were trying to rev up the men's wives and girlfriends and mommies to make them say, you're not going to that evil coffee house, you're going to stay home with me. That did not work. But the debate is going to go on for 50 years over coffee, 50 years. In the end, the Ottoman people ignored it and they continued the practice and kept all the coffee houses open. This is important because, I know, it actually is important, believe it or not, because it's the first time that the citizens of the Ottoman Empire ever defied their government. Their government was so good to them that this coffee thing was the only thing that the people said, we're not going to listen to you. So coffee is some powerful stuff, but it does have a point in history because it's the first time that the Ottomans ever said no to their government. So naturally, one of the exports coming out of the Ottoman Empire is coffee. And you got to have something to put your coffee in, so they also started making ceramics. So cups for the coffee. Makes sense to me. And that is the Ottoman Empire. It is that simple. So just know the Hagia Sophia. Make sure you know about the coffees. Make sure you know about why the government seemed better than that of the Mughal Empire, all the good things that they did. And you're good to go. The end.